On Christmas Eve, I overheard my son and his wife finalizing their plan. Step 1, get my signature. Step 2, take my house. Step 3, put me in a home. They thought I was a frail old man. They forgot what I used to do for a living. By the time they returned to the house they thought was theirs, all that was left for them was a sold sign and a visit from the police. Before I continue, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Your stories and support mean the world. And be sure to like and subscribe if you believe that dignity is something worth fighting for at any age. The first week of December felt different that year. The cold that settled over Austin was sharper, and it seemed to find its way through the window frames of the house I had built with my wife Clara. It was a house made of Texas limestone and 47 years of memories, but my daughter-in-law Jess only saw the square footage. She was walking through the living room that evening, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a smooth, confident hum that didn't belong within these walls. She was talking to an interior designer, a fact I gathered from the words she used, words that felt like stones being thrown at my life's work. Potential, she said, pacing across the hardwood floors. It has good bones, of course, but it's all so dated. We'd need to open this whole space up. A full open concept. That dreadful wallpaper in the dining room has to go immediately. And these floors, they need to be completely refinished. I was sitting in my worn leather armchair in the corner, a book open on my lap. The pages hadn't turned in 20 minutes. I was a piece of the furniture she was planning to replace, an old fixture that no longer fit her modern aesthetic. Each word she spoke was a small erasure of Clara. The wallpaper she called Dreadful Clara had picked it out herself, her eyes shining as she held the sample against the wall, declaring it looked like a field of wildflowers. The floors Jess wanted to refinish still held a small, faint scuff mark near the hearth, a mark left by our son Mark's first tricycle on his 3rd birthday. I could still hear Clara's laughter from that day. To Jess, it was an imperfection to be sanded away. To me, it was a scar I treasured. I kept my eyes on my book, my breathing even. I had learned in my 72 years that the most important battles are often won by observing the field before making a move. I was a retired forensic accountant. My entire career had been about finding the truth hidden in plain sight, decoding the stories that numbers and patterns told when people thought no one was looking. And the pattern here was becoming painfully clear. Mark came home, then his briefcase in hand, his shoulders slumped from the weight of his day. He walked in, and the atmosphere in the room immediately tensed. He saw Jess on the phone, a predator circling her territory, and he saw me in the corner, a silent, immovable stone. Jess ended her call with a cheerful, "I'll send you the floor plans tomorrow." She walked over to Mark, giving him a quick kiss before whispering something in his ear. I saw his eyes flick towards me for a fraction of a second, a flicker of guilt before he looked away. That was his tell, the quick, averted glance. It was the same look he had when he was 8 years old and tried to convince me the neighbor's window had simply broken on its own. He walked over, loosening his tie. "Good day, Dad," he asked. The question was hollow, a line from a script he was tired of reading. "It was quiet, son," I replied, my voice calm. Good," he said, already turning away. "We're just going to head upstairs for a bit before dinner." He didn't wait for a response. He followed Jess up the stairs, leaving me in a silence that was louder than any argument. The message was clear. This was their house now, and I was just a tenant on a lease that was about to expire. I looked at the photograph of Clara and me on the mantel taken the day we moved in. We were so young, our arms around each other, our faces full of a future we thought we would share forever within these walls. "Oh, Clara," I whispered to the empty room. "You wouldn't believe this." Later that evening, after a dinner of leftovers that Jess had served with a sigh of impatience, I sat down at my small desk in the study. I opened my laptop intending to read the news, but a notification caught my eye. An email from my bank. The subject line made my heart skip a beat. Action required information. Verification for your loan application. My hands, usually so steady, felt a slight tremor. I hadn't applied for any loan. I was debt-free. My house had been paid off for 2 decades. I clicked open the email. It was a standard automated message from the Fraud Prevention Department, asking me to confirm a recent application for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. My training, my entire professional life kicked in. The part of my brain that had laid dormant since retirement suddenly lit up cold and sharp. I didn't panic. I began to analyze. I was about to stand up to walk into the living room and demand an explanation, but then I heard their voices. Mark and Jess were sitting on the sofa, their heads close together over a glowing tablet. I could hear Jess's excited whispers. "Look at this one, honey. The Wolf gas range. And the Sub-Zero fridge. It would fit perfectly once we take out that wall." Mark murmured something in agreement. They were spending money they didn't have, and a cold, heavy certainty settled in the pit of my stomach. The loan application, their extravagant plans. It was all connected. I looked at the email again. Then I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who now couldn't even look me in the eye. I closed the laptop. Confrontation now would only give them time to cover their tracks. No. An auditor never announces his audit. He simply begins his work. I went to bed that night not as a grieving father, but as a man with a case to solve. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in a sheath of forced cheerfulness. Jess had decorated the house with a cold, minimalist precision. Silver and white ornaments replaced the mismatched, colorful collection of memories Clara and I had gathered over the years. The scent of pine was masked by an expensive artificial cinnamon candle. We sat down for dinner, a dry roast chicken and overcooked vegetables. The conversation was painfully superficial, revolving around Mark's job and Jess's latest real estate conquests. They gave me my gift. It was a cashmere sweater, elegantly wrapped. I unfolded it to find a charcoal gray V-neck. It was an expensive, thoughtful gift for a stranger. I hadn't worn a V-neck in my life, a fact my son once knew. I thanked them, my smile feeling like a mask. Later that night, long after the house had fallen silent, I lay awake in my bed. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind was a whirl of numbers, dates, and suspicions. Around 2 a.m, I gave up and decided to go downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dark, save for the soft, multicolored glow of the Christmas tree lights in the living room, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I moved quietly, my footsteps muffled by the runner in the hallway. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices, whispers. They were coming from the living room. Mark and Jess were on the sofa, sitting in the dark, illuminated only by the glow of the tree. They must have thought I was sound asleep, lost in an old man's heavy slumber. I froze in the shadows of the hallway, just out of their line of sight. Jess's voice was a sharp, insistent hiss. "You have to do it, Mark. It's the only way. Just get him to sign the power of attorney papers after the holiday. Tell him it's for his own good. Once that's done, we can leverage the full value of the house. We can get the down payment for the Lake Travis place. After Christmas, we'll move him to Brookdale. I already took a tour. It's fine." I felt the air leave my lungs. Brookdale. A nursing home. Mark's voice was low-laced with a pathetic thread of hesitation. "Jess, I don't know. It's my dad's house." "It will be our house," Jess snapped, her whisper like the crack of a whip. "He's getting confused, Mark. He won't even know what he's signing. This is our one chance to get the life we deserve. We'll be gentle but firm. We'll kick him out after Christmas." The words hung in the silent air. Kick him out. Not move him, not find him a new place. Kick him out. I stood there in the darkness and something inside me shifted. It wasn't a snap of anger. It was the cold, clean click of a lock falling into place. The fuzzy picture of my life had come into sharp, brutal focus. The man on the sofa was not the son I had raised. The woman beside him was a stranger who saw me as an obstacle. My heart was beating a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. There was no fear. There was no sadness. There was only a profound and chilling clarity. I did not retreat back up the stairs. I did not make a sound. I turned with the deliberate, quiet precision of an old clock and walked back to my room. I closed my door without a sound and sat in the armchair facing the window. The fight was over. The war had just begun. The part of me that had been a patient, grieving father was gone, replaced by the man I used to be. The man who could find a single fraudulent number in a 1,000,000-page ledger. The man who understood that the only true justice is the one you build yourself, one piece of undeniable evidence at a time. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. The morning of December 26th dawned gray and damp, the sky weeping a slow, steady drizzle against the windows. The house was a museum of a holiday that had already passed. Torn wrapping paper overflowed from a trash bag in the corner, and a few stray pine needles dotted the floor like forgotten breadcrumbs. The air was thick with a hollow silence. I heard them before I saw them, their voices carrying from the upstairs bedroom. Jess was talking about returning a gift, her tone sharp and annoyed. Mark's replies were tired murmurs. They came down the stairs dressed in new coats, their faces set with the grim determination of shoppers on a mission. Mark paused at the door. "We're heading out to the outlets, Dad," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "There are some big sales on. We'll probably be gone most of the day." "All right, son," I said, looking up from the newspaper I wasn't reading. "Drive safe." Jess was already tapping her foot impatiently on the porch. "Let's go, Mark. We'll hit traffic." He gave me one last fleeting look of something I couldn't quite name, guilt, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. And then he was gone. I listened to the sound of their car starting the engine, revving a little too aggressively before the tires crunched on the wet gravel of the driveway. Then silence. A deep, profound silence that felt like the house was finally breathing again. It was the first time I had been truly alone since I'd overheard their plan. The silence was not an emptiness. It was a space to think, a space to act. I folded the newspaper with methodical precision and placed it on the coffee table. I walked into my study, the small room where Clara and I had balanced our checkbooks and planned our vacations for nearly 50 years. I went to the bookshelf and pulled out a small leather-bound address book. The leather was cracked at the spine, and the edges of the pages were soft and worn. It was filled with the names of friends and family, some of whom were no longer with us. The handwriting inside was a mix of my own neat block letters and Clara's elegant looping cursive. I turned the pages, a silent procession of my life's relationships, until I found the name I was looking for, written in my own hand years ago, David Chen. I sat down in my desk chair, the old leather sighing under my weight, and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a voice answered, a voice that was clear and confident. "David Chen." "David," I said. "It's Leo Petrov." The professionalism in his voice immediately softened, replaced by a genuine warmth. "Leo, it's great to hear from you. How are you? How was your Christmas? It was illuminating." "David, how is your family? How are Sarah and the kids?" "They're great, thanks for asking. The kids are still buzzing from all the presents. You know how it is." "I do," I said, and a genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in days. "I remember. You know, David, it's raining here today. A slow, steady rain. It reminds me of that big thunderstorm we had back in '98, the one that took a dozen shingles off my roof." David chuckled. "I remember it. My dad was up on your roof the very next morning. I was 16 and he dragged me up there with him to help." "He did," I said, my voice quiet. "He wouldn't take a dime for it. I tried to pay him and he just shook his head and said, "That's what neighbors do, Leo." Your father was a good man, David. You've got his heart. I saw it on the day you passed the bar exam. I was sitting in the back of that auditorium, and when they called your name, the look on your face, your dad would have been so proud. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and when David spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Thank you, Leo. That means a lot to me. I took a breath. The pleasantries were over. It was time to get to work. David, I said, my tone shifting, losing its nostalgic warmth, and taking on a new, focused seriousness. I need to retain your services. The change was immediate. The warmth in David's voice was replaced by a sharp, professional focus. Of course, Leo. Is everything all right? No, I said simply. Something has happened. On Christmas Eve, I overheard a conversation between my son and his wife. They believe I am becoming senile. They have a plan to have me sign over power of attorney, use my house as collateral for their own ventures, and then move me into an assisted living facility. I recounted the conversation I had heard not with the emotion of a betrayed father, but with the dispassionate precision of an accountant listing figures in a ledger. I told him every word I could remember. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could almost feel David's shock, his disbelief warring with his trust in me. Leo, he finally said, his voice tight. Are you absolutely certain? Could there have been a misunderstanding? Mark loves you. Mark loves the idea of a life he hasn't earned, I corrected gently. And his wife has shown him what she believes is the fastest way to get it. And yes, I am certain. There's more. I received an email from my bank about a HELOC application I never made. That was it. The dam of his disbelief broke, and a flood of cold anger came through the phone. What? A fraudulent loan application. Leo, that's a federal crime. The gall of it. The absolute stomach-turning disrespect. I could hear him pacing in his office, his controlled, lawyerly demeanor completely gone, replaced by the fury of a man defending his family. Because to David, I was family, and that's why I had to be the one to pull him back from the edge. Anger is a luxury we can't afford right now, David, I said, my voice calm and steady, cutting through his rage. Anger makes mistakes. It's emotional. It leaves a mess. We are not going to make any mistakes. We are not going to be emotional. This is a ledger, David, a complex one with hidden columns and false entries. Every move we make from now on must be precise. It must be calculated, and it must be irrefutable. I need a professional right now, not just an angry friend. Can you be that for me? There was another pause. I could hear him take a deep, calming breath. When he spoke again, the fire was gone, replaced by ice. Yes, Leo. Yes, I can. I'm sorry. You're right. Okay, let's work the problem. What do you need from me? I need you to be my eyes and ears, I said. I need a full financial review of all my assets, my accounts, my credit, everything. I suspect the HELOC is just the tip of the iceberg. I need to know exactly what they've done. Understood, David said, and I could hear the faint sound of him typing on a keyboard. First step, we need to get a limited power of attorney in place, one that gives me authority to access those financial records on your behalf. We can do it electronically. I'll draft it and email it to you within the hour. We need to see everything they've been doing under your name. Agreed, I said. What's the second step? The second step is containment. David's voice was firm. They're after the house. That's the grand prize. We need to protect your primary asset, and we need to do it immediately before they can make another move. We need to insulate it from any further attempts at fraudulent leverage. We need to act before they realize you're onto them. I looked out the window at the rain-soaked lawn, at the mighty oak tree Clara and I had planted as a sapling. What are you suggesting? David? I'm suggesting we take the board away from them, Leo, he said. His voice dropping slightly now, full of a cold, strategic energy. They think they're about to take your queen. It's time to show them they've been playing checkers while you've been playing chess. A plan began to form, a series of moves and countermoves, of legal firewalls and financial traps. It was a complex and dangerous strategy, but for the first time in 3 years since Clara had passed, I felt a sense of purpose. The grief that had been a heavy fog in my mind began to recede, replaced by the sharp, clear focus of a man with one last important job to do. "Send me the documents, David," I said. "Let's get to work." As soon as the electronic documents arrived from David, I got to work. My study, once a place of quiet reading and reflection, transformed back into what it was always meant to be, a forensic accountant's office. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed in shades of gray. It was a perfect canvas for the black and white clarity of numbers. There is a truth in numbers that people can never replicate. They do not lie, they do not get emotional, and they do not forget. My son and his wife had forgotten that I'd spent my life in this world of unflinching truth. I logged into my primary bank account, my fingers moving across the keyboard with a muscle memory that had never faded. For years, my work had been to dive into the tangled financial histories of corporations, to find the single misplaced decimal point or the cleverly hidden account that could bring a whole corrupt enterprise crashing down. I had navigated oceans of data. This would be like navigating a small pond, but it was a pond with a monster hiding at the bottom. I didn't start with my main accounts. That's not how an audit works. You start at the edges, at the periphery where people get careless. I ran a full credit report on myself first. I scrolled through the familiar lines of my mortgage paid in full, my one credit card with its modest balance also paid in full each month. And then I saw it. 6 months ago. A hard inquiry from a secondary lender, one I had never heard of. It was a loose thread. I began to pull. A few more clicks, a few more passwords entered into a system that still recognized me as its master, and I found the source. It was a home equity line of credit. A HELOC for $150,000 opened against the full value of my home. My home. The home Clara and I had poured our souls into, now being used as an ATM for a lifestyle I didn't recognize. A coldness spread through my chest, but it was not the coldness of fear. It was the coldness of a laboratory, the sterile chill of pure, unadulterated fact. But I needed the paperwork. I needed the ink on the page. I picked up the phone and dialed the lender's customer service line. When a cheerful young woman answered, I pitched my voice to sound exactly as they expected, an old man to sound slightly frail, a little confused, but polite. "Hello, my dear," I began. "I hope you can help me. I'm just trying to get my papers in order. You know how it is at my age. My son helps me with these things, but I seem to have misplaced the original documents for a small loan I took out. Could you possibly be so kind as to email me a copy of the origination paperwork for my records?" I gave her the account number. She was happy to help. A minute later, an email landed in my inbox with a PDF attachment. I thanked her profusely and hung up. I took a slow, steadying breath, and I opened the file. The document loaded page by page. And then on page 4, I saw it. My signature, or what was supposed to be my signature, on the line above my printed name. I stared at it. To a stranger, it would have looked perfect. To a bank teller in a hurry, it was flawless. But to me, it was a grotesque caricature. I have signed my name for 72 years. I know its rhythm, its habits. The loop on my L always has a slight flatness at the top. This one was perfectly round. The cross on my T is always a little low. This one was perfectly centered. It was a careful, sterile, lifeless copy of my name, a forgery created with a steady hand and a cold heart. It was the signature of a ghost. Now that I had the account details and the proof of forgery, the final step was to follow the money. This was the part of the job I always found the most revealing. People can lie about their intentions, but their bank statements tell the unvarnished truth. I accessed the transaction history for the HELOC. The story of the last 6 months unfurled on my screen, a litany of greed and betrayal. The first withdrawal 6 months ago, $45,000, transferred directly to a BMW dealership in North Austin. I remembered the day Jess had driven home in her new white SUV. She'd claimed a huge commission check had finally come through. Mark had stood beside her, beaming with a hollow pride. The next series of charges 4 months ago, $12,000. The St. Regis Resort in Aspen, the airline tickets, the expensive restaurant bills. They had sent me a postcard from that trip, a picture of a snow-covered mountain. "Thinking of you, Dad. It's a work conference, but we're making the most of it," the card had said. Then came the stream of smaller, more insidious transactions. Neiman Marcus, Louis Vuitton, a $5,000 watch from a boutique downtown, the one I recognized as the new one on Mark's wrist. They weren't just planning for a future without me. They had been actively looting my past, dismantling the financial security Clara and I had spent our lives building, all to create a facade of wealth. I was no longer just an obstacle in their way. I was the secret, unwilling investor in their lie. I methodically saved every statement, every transaction record. I highlighted every purchase. I built my case brick by brick until the structure of their deceit was undeniable, a fortress of fraud with my name forged on the cornerstone. Then I picked up the phone and called David again. When he answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "David," I said, my voice as flat and hard as a granite slab. "It's worse than we thought." "What did you find, Leo?" "I found a $150,000 HELOC taken out 6 months ago with a forged signature. I'm sending you the documents now. I also have the full transaction history. It seems my son and his wife have been living quite well on my equity." I emailed him the files as I spoke. I heard the notification ping on his end, followed by a long, charged silence. I could picture him in his office, his eyes scanning the documents, the professional calm draining from his face to be replaced by a lawyer's righteous fury. I heard a sharp intake of breath. "My God, Leo," he finally whispered, his voice full of a new steely gravity. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This isn't a matter of disrespect. This is bank fraud, forgery. This is a Class A felony in the state of Texas. We have them. Leo, we have them cold." "I know," I said. "This changes the endgame," David said, his voice gaining speed and power. "This isn't about just getting you out of there with your house intact. We have a legal and moral obligation to report this. They committed a serious crime, Leo, against you and against the bank. They will face the law," David Foss assured him. "Of that there will be no question. But first they will face me." David hesitated. "Leo, the DA's office would handle this. We can turn over the evidence." "No," I cut him off, my voice quiet but absolute. "They used my name to write a fiction. I will use the truth to write the ending. They did this in the dark, in whispers. I will bring it into the light, in my own home, on my own terms." A new idea was forming in my mind, a way to present the final ledger, to make them see the cold, hard sum of their actions, not in a courtroom, but in the living room where they planned their betrayal. "What are you thinking?" Leo David asked, sensing the shift in my tone. "I'm thinking of a home movie," I said. "A presentation. I need you to handle the legal side. Prepare a full report for the district attorney. And I need you to do something else for me. I want you to find a cash buyer for the house. A quick, clean sale. Liquidate the asset. Protect it." David was silent for a moment, processing the audacity of the plan. Then I heard a slow smile in his voice. "You're going to present them with the evidence yourself while the house is being sold out from under them. An audit should always be presented to management before the final report is filed," I said. "It's professional courtesy." Leo David said, a note of deep respect in his voice. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." "No," I said, looking at the picture of Clara on my desk, her smile a beacon of the life we had built, and the legacy I would now protect. "They don't." but they're about to find out. The week after Christmas was a week of quiet, calculated observation. The house, now stripped of its forced holiday cheer, seemed to have returned to its natural state, a silent witness to the growing tension within its walls. Mark and Jess moved with a new kind of energy, a restless impatience that vibrated just beneath the surface of their polite questions and solicitous gestures. Jess would leave magazines open on the coffee table, all of them displaying pristine, minimalist homes with sprawling kitchens and infinity pools. Mark would ask me if I needed anything from the store a dozen times a day, his voice laced with an artificial concern that never quite reached his eyes. They were circling. I was the patient old lion, and they were the hyenas waiting for me to show the final sign of weakness before they moved in for the kill. They thought my silence was frailty. They had no idea it was a forge hardening my resolve with every passing hour. They chose a Tuesday evening to make their move. We had just finished a quiet dinner of takeout, the styrofoam containers still sitting on the kitchen counter. I was in my armchair reading when they approached. They moved together a united front. Jess was holding a thick manila folder, at least an inch thick, bound by a heavy-duty binder clip. She placed it on the small table beside my chair. The sound it made was not the soft rustle of paper, but a solid, definitive thud. It was a statement, an ultimatum disguised as a folder. Mark cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He pulled over a dining chair and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, adopting a posture of earnest sincerity that I knew he used in his sales meetings. "Dad," he began, his eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Jess and I have been talking and, well, we've been worried about you." "Worried about what, son?" I asked, closing my book, but keeping my finger in place to mark my page. "Just everything," he said, waving a vague hand. "The bills, the maintenance on the house, your accounts. It's a lot for one person to handle. We want to help you. We want to take that burden off your shoulders." Jess, ever the smooth, closer, leaned against the arm of the sofa, her smile radiating a condescending warmth. "It's really just a formality, Leo," she said, her voice like honey mixed with poison. "It's about proactive planning. We've had a lawyer draw up some standard paperwork that will allow Mark to help manage your finances. It's just so you don't have to worry about a single thing. We'll handle all the boring bills and paperwork from now on." I looked at the thick stack of papers. A formality. Before they had even sat down, as I heard them coming down the hall, I had picked up my phone from the table. I had tapped the screen, opening the voice memo app and pressing the red record button. Then I had placed it face down beside my reading lamp, a silent, unblinking ear, ready to capture every word. "Well," I said, my voice a little gravelly, "that's very thoughtful of you both." I reached for the folder, my hand intentionally a little shaky. I lifted the stack of papers, letting their weight seem almost too much for me. My. That's a lot of paperwork for a simple formality. I fumbled in my shirt pocket for my reading glasses, taking my time. I slid them on, then proceeded to put on a show. I held the papers up close to my face, squinting. Then I held them out at arm's length. I let out a frustrated sigh. Good heavens. The print seems to get smaller every year. Or maybe it's just my old eyes. I took the glasses off and rubbed the bridge of my nose wearily. "Mark, I can barely make out these headlines. What exactly is all this?" Mark shifted in his chair, visibly relieved to be given a task, a script to read from. "Of course, Dad. The first section is the most important. It's a durable power of attorney." I feigned confusion, looking at him over the top of my glasses. "Durable like a good pair of boots, that sounds very important. What exactly does durable mean in this case, son?" I made my voice sound innocent, the question of a man genuinely trying to understand. He took the bait. On my phone, his voice was being recorded, clear and confident. "It just means that it remains in effect even if you were to become incapacitated, Dad. It allows me to make financial decisions on your behalf to ensure you're always taken care of. I see, I murmured, nodding slowly. Taken care of. And what's this next part? It looks even more complicated. I pointed to another section, my finger trembling just slightly. Jess, sensing Mark was struggling, jumped in smoothly. That's just the legal framework for asset management, Leo. It ties into the power of attorney. It covers things like property and investments. Property? I asked, my eyes wide. You mean the house? Well, yes, the house is your biggest asset, she said, her smile never faltering. This just ensures we can manage it properly for you. I looked back and forth between them, my face a mask of befuddled concentration. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting their eagerness build. Then I asked the question that the entire performance had been leading up to. The question that would either spring the trap or expose my game. I looked directly at Mark, then at Jess, my voice that of a simple, tired old man trying to grasp a complex concept. So just to be clear for an old man's mind, please correct me if I'm wrong. If I sign all of these papers right here tonight, it means that you two, I gestured between them, will be in complete charge of the house and all of my money. Is that right? You would be able to, for instance, sell the house if you thought it was for the best for my care. Jess's eyes lit up. She saw the finish line. She thought my question was me finally understanding, finally acquiescing to the inevitable. Exactly, Leo, she said, her voice bright with victory. You've got it. It just gives us the flexibility to make the best decisions for your care down the line. It protects you. Mark nodded in agreement, a wave of relief washing over his face. That's all it is, Dad. It protects you. I looked down at the signature line on the top page. A pen was sitting right beside it, placed there by Jess. My audience of two leaned forward, waiting. The recording on my phone was now a priceless artifact, a taped confession of their intentions, their own words confirming their plan to seize total control. I picked up the pen. I held it over the line. I could feel their collective breath being held. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I set the pen down on the table next to the folder, not on it. I let out a long, theatrical sigh. That's a lot to take in, children. A whole lot. A man my age. You can't rush these big decisions. It's my whole life on these pages. I looked up at them, my expression one of profound weariness. I need to let it sit for a while. Let me think about it. The change in the room was instantaneous. The air, once filled with predatory expectation, now crackled with a barely concealed frustration. Jess's smile tightened at the edges, a hairline fracture in her perfect facade. Mark just looked down at the floor, unable to hide his disappointment. Of course, Dad, he mumbled. Take your time. I will, I said, patting the stack of papers as if it were a sleeping animal. I'll keep these right here and try to read them over again in the morning when my eyes are fresh. We can talk again in a few days. They stood up, the meeting clearly adjourned by me, its weakest member. They walked away, and as soon as they thought they were out of earshot, I heard Jess hiss at Mark. What was that? He was right there. Just give him a few days, Jess, Mark whispered back. He's old. He's just scared. He'll sign. I heard their footsteps recede up the stairs. I sat there in the quiet living room, the folder on the table beside me like a ticking bomb. I reached over and calmly stopped the recording on my phone. They thought they had failed for the night. They had no idea they had just succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They had just handed me the final crucial piece of my case against them. They thought I was a confused old man who needed time to think. The truth was, I was a forensic accountant who had just successfully completed his deposition. And I had all the evidence I needed. The days that followed were a study in duality. I was living two lives under one roof. In the evenings and early mornings, I was Leo Petrov, the quiet, slow-moving father, the man my son and his wife saw as a relic to be managed. I would sit in my armchair, read my books, and answer their hollow questions with tired, simple responses. I played the part they had written for me, and they, in their arrogance, believed the performance. But the moment the sound of their car faded down the street each morning, the house would transform. The quiet living room became my command center. The tired old man would recede, and the forensic accountant would emerge. I moved with a new purpose, a quiet energy that filled the empty spaces they left behind. My mind, which they thought was clouded with age, was a flurry of calculations, strategies, and timetables. The first move happened on a Thursday. At precisely 10 in the morning, a modest sedan pulled into my driveway, not a flashy car that would draw a neighbor's attention. David Chen got out, but he wasn't alone. With him was a man in his 50s named Mr. Harrison. He was the cash buyer David had found, a professional real estate investor who specialized in discreet, off-market transactions. He didn't look at the house with the starry eyes of a prospective homeowner. He looked at it like a doctor examining a patient. We didn't linger on the curb appeal. I led them inside, and Mr. Harrison conducted his inspection with a quiet, swift efficiency. He didn't comment on Clara's wildflower wallpaper or the color of the kitchen cabinets. He ran his hand along a wall in the living room, testing for structural integrity. He spent 5 minutes in the basement looking at the foundation and the plumbing. He was not buying memories or a dream. He was buying an asset, a collection of wood, stone, and copper wiring. His clinical approach was a strange comfort. He was detached from the soul of the house, which was exactly what I needed. He was the surgeon who could perform the necessary amputation. As he was finishing his tour, he paused in the doorway of the master bedroom and looked at me. "You've lived here long?" he asked, his voice not unkind. "My whole life," I answered the words, feeling both completely true and like a summary of a book I was about to close. He nodded once, a gesture of professional respect. On the way out in the living room, he turned to David and named his price. It was a fair all-cash offer, slightly below market value, in exchange for a closing in just 2 weeks. No inspections, no contingencies. A clean, fast transaction. "My client accepts," David said, shaking his hand. And just like that, a 47-year history was reduced to a number on a future contract. The first major gear of my machine had turned. That afternoon, after David and Mr. Harrison had gone, I began the most difficult part of my work. I went up to the attic and brought down a set of sturdy, empty boxes. The task was not to pack up a life, but to distill it. I was not moving. I was extracting the essence. I left the furniture where it stood. The dining table where we'd hosted decades of Thanksgiving dinners, the sofa where I had taught Mark to read. They were just objects, now stage props from a play whose run was over. Instead, I packed the things that held no monetary value, but were to me priceless. I carefully took down the large framed photograph of Clara and me from the mantel and wrapped it in a soft blanket. I went to her closet, which still held the faint, familiar scent of her perfume, and took out her old recipe box. I ran my thumb over the worn index cards. Her familiar cursive detailing the ingredients for pot roast and apple pie, the corner of one card stained with a drop of vanilla extract. I packed my father's old watch, its face yellowed with age. I gathered the albums filled with faded photographs of Mark as a child, a smiling, gap-toothed boy on a bicycle, a sullen teenager in a too-large suit at his graduation. I packed the physical proof that the man who now saw me as a burden had once been a boy who saw me as the whole world. I worked all afternoon, the house silent, except for the rustle of packing paper and the quiet echo of my own breathing. It was a methodical process of grief and release. With each item I placed in a box, I was making a choice. I was deciding what was worth saving. And in doing so, I felt a strange lightness. They could have the wood and the nails. They could have the square footage and the updated kitchen they dreamed of. They could not touch these things. They could not pack up a memory or put a lien on a ghost. In my mind, I spoke to Clara. I have to let the house go, my love, I thought as I sealed the last box. It's just an empty shell now. We took the best parts with us a long time ago. That evening, my work shifted back from the emotional to the tactical. I sat at my desk, a secure video call connecting me to David in his downtown office. On my screen, he looked every bit the sharp, focused lawyer. On his screen, I looked every bit the calm, retired accountant. Together, we were a formidable team. We did a final review of the evidence package, the culmination of a week's worth of secret work. "Okay, Leo," David said, sharing his screen with me. "Let's go over it one last time." I saw the file meticulously organized. There was the scanned copy of the HELOC application, with the forged signature highlighted in a stark digital red. There was the audio file from my phone, its waveform a visual representation of their lies. Next to it was a full notarized transcript of the conversation. And finally, there was the spreadsheet. I had built a damning color-coded ledger tracking every single dollar they had stolen, cross-referencing dates of purchases with their social media posts about work trips and bonus checks. "It's a fortress," Leo David said, his voice grim but satisfied. "There are no holes. The sworn statement you wrote is detailed and compelling. Once I submit this to the DA's office, the gears will start turning. An investigator will be assigned. I want you to be prepared for that. There is no turning back from this." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Some gears need to turn. Some things need to be broken before they can be fixed." As we were about to sign off, a notification popped up in the corner of my screen. It was an email from David's paralegal. The subject line was a single powerful word, executed. David saw it too. "That's it, Leo," he said quietly. "The buyer has signed. I'm sending it to you for your digital signature now." A moment later, the contract appeared. I scrolled to the final page and with a steady hand clicked on the signature line. I typed my name, my true name, and clicked Confirm. A small box appeared on the screen. "Congratulations, you have signed the document." I looked at those words for a long time. David's voice came through the speakers, pulling me back. "It's done," he said. "The closing is set for 2 weeks from Friday. The funds will be wired to a new account that we've set up, an account that they know nothing about. And the sold sign. It was delivered to my office this afternoon. It's ready to be installed whenever you give the word." I nodded slowly. The final pieces were locked in place. The sale of my past was now legally binding. The evidence for their future was ready to be delivered. I was now a ghost in my own home, a silent observer counting down the days. The pressure in the house was about to reach its breaking point, and I would be the one to decide when and how it would finally explode. A year is a long time to live inside a lie. It's 365 days of playing a part, of sitting at a dinner table with people who are waiting for you to disappear and smiling as you pass them the salt. It's 52 weeks of watching them grow more and more impatient, their polite facades cracking under the strain of their own greed. I watched the seasons change from my armchair, and with each passing month I saw the frustration in their eyes grow. They thought my refusal to sign their papers was a sign of a failing mind. They mistook my patience for senility. They had no idea that my mind was sharper than ever, and that my patience was not a weakness, but a weapon honed to a razor's edge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment was Christmas morning. Exactly 1 year to the day, I had become a ghost in my own home. The scene was almost identical. The same cold, elegant decorations, the same forced smiles. We sat in the living room after a breakfast of store-bought pastries, a small, sad pile of presents between us. They gave me another sweater, this one a bland beige, and a subscription to a magazine I would never read. They were the gifts of strangers, offerings made out of obligation, not love. After the last gift was unwrapped, a heavy silence fell over the room. This was it. I could feel it. Jess placed her coffee cup down on the table with a delicate click. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and turned to me, her face arranged into a mask of loving concern. "Leo," she began, her voice dripping with a sweetness that was more cloying than sugar. "Mark and I have some wonderful news. We've been doing a lot of research and we've found the most amazing place for you. It's a vibrant senior living community just north of the city. It has a full continuum of care, social activities, everything you could possibly need. We think you'll be able to truly thrive there." Mark nodded along his eyes on the carpet. "It's a really great place, Dad. We went for a tour. We think you'll love it." They had finally said it. The words they had whispered in the dark a year ago were now being presented to me in the bright morning light as a gift. The final loving push out of my own life. I looked from Jess's predatory smile to Mark's downcast, guilty face, and I smiled back. It was not a smile of sadness or resignation. It was a calm, serene smile, the kind of smile a man has when he is holding all the winning cards. They both faltered for a second, confused by my placid reaction. "Well," I said, my voice surprisingly strong and clear in the tense silence, "that sounds very thorough. But before I go anywhere, there's something I'd like to share with all of you. A little tradition I'd like to start. I've prepared a special home movie, a look back at the last year." I reached for the television remote on the table beside me. Jess shot Mark a look of pure annoyance. A home movie. The senile old man wanted to bore them with his nostalgia. Mark just shrugged, a flicker of relief in his eyes. A detour was better than a fight. "Of course, Dad," he said. "We'd love to see it." I aimed the remote at the large dark screen above the fireplace. "Good," I said. "It's important to remember the past." I pressed the power button. The 65-inch screen flickered to life, but it wasn't a grainy home video that appeared. There was no smiling family, no birthday parties, no vacations. The screen was filled with a crisp, clear, professional presentation, the kind you would see in a courtroom or a corporate boardroom. The background was a stark clinical white. The font was a simple, bold black. The first image to appear was simple and devastating. On the left side of the screen was a high-resolution scan of my signature taken from my passport. The familiar, slightly tired loop of the L, the confident cross of the T. On the right side was the signature from the bank's HELOC application. A perfect, sterile imitation. A red circle highlighted the subtle differences an expert, or the man who had written the name for 72 years, could see instantly. And between the two images, in bold red letters 2 inches high, was a single word: forgery. The silence in the room was absolute. It was as if the air itself had frozen. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the screen. Then the slide changed. The next image was a clean, cold spreadsheet. The title at the top read, "Disbursement of Funds, HELOC Account, Ending in 4758. Below it was a meticulously detailed list of expenditures. A line item for $45,000 paid to BMW of North Austin. A charge for $12,000 at the St. Regis Aspen. A series of smaller yet equally damning charges from Neiman Marcus, Gucci, Rolex. It was a complete financial diary of their secret life, a monument to their greed, all paid for with the equity of the home my wife and I had built with our own hands. I could feel their eyes on the screen. I could hear the subtle shift in their breathing, the slow dawning horror. The final slide was the most powerful. The screen went black for a moment, and then a simple pulsing audio waveform appeared in the center, the kind you see in a recording studio. A title appeared above it. Recorded January 4th. Location: this room. And then their own voices filled the space, as clear and undeniable as the morning light streaming through the windows. It was the recording I had made when they presented me with their papers. Jess's voice came first, sharp and condescendingly sweet. "Exactly. Leo. You've got it. It just gives us the flexibility to make the best decisions for your care down the line. It protects you. Then came Mark's weak, hollow echo. That's all it is, Dad. It protects you. The word protects hung in the air, an obscene echo in the dead silence that followed. The audio file stopped playing, but the waveform remained on the screen, a silent accusation. I finally turned to look at them. The transformation was horrifying. The color had completely drained from Jess's face, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a painted mask on a marble statue. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have stolen her breath. Mark had physically collapsed. He was slumped deep into the sofa cushions, his hands covering his face, his body trembling in great silent shudders. Jess was the first to speak, her voice a strangled, pathetic whisper. What? What is this, Leo? What is this? Is this some kind of joke? I looked at her. My face calm, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I gave her no anger. I gave her no rage. I gave her only the cold, hard truth she had tried so hard to bury. The joke, I said, my voice perfectly level, was that you thought I was a fool. You thought I was a piece of furniture you could move out of the way. You forgot what I did for a living for 40 years. I clicked the remote and the screen went black. The show was over. The evidence had been presented. And in the crushing, absolute silence of the room, I could hear the sound of their world, their carefully constructed lie, shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The silence that followed my presentation was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered all sound. It was broken by a sound that was both ordinary and, in that moment, terrifying. The sharp, cheerful chime of the doorbell. It cut through the tension like a scalpel. Mark and Jess both flinched as if struck. Their heads snapped toward the door, their eyes wide with a new primal fear of the outside world, of a reality they could no longer control. I, on the other hand, felt a profound sense of calm. Everything was proceeding exactly on schedule. I placed the remote control down on the coffee table next to the untouched plate of Christmas cookies. That must be for me, I said quietly. I stood up and walked to the door, my steps even and unhurried. Behind me, I could hear a choked sob escape from Mark. I did not turn around. I reached the door and turned the handle. The bright morning light streamed in, silhouetting the 3 figures standing on my porch. 2 were in the crisp blue uniforms of the Austin Police Department. The third was David Chen, his face as impassive and hard as carved stone. David looked past me, his eyes locking onto my son and daughter-in-law, who were now staring in abject horror. His voice was cold, professional, and carried the immense weight of the law. Mark Petrov, Jessica Petrov, he asked, though it was not a question. My name is David Chen. These are Officers Miller and Davies. They have some questions for you regarding allegations of bank fraud and financial elder abuse. The words detonated in the silent room. Jess let out a raw, guttural scream, a sound of pure animal rage and denial. No, you can't. This is our house. Mark simply dissolved, collapsing fully into the sofa, his body racked with loud, heaving sobs of a man completely and utterly broken. The officers stepped inside their presence, calm and authoritative amidst the chaos, and began their procedure. Their world had imploded. My work here was done. I turned away from the scene, away from the wreckage of their choices, and walked down the short hallway to my bedroom. I opened the door, picked up the small, single suitcase I had packed weeks ago, and walked back out. I passed the living room without a glance. I walked past the police officers, past David, who gave me a subtle, respectful nod, and past the ruins of my son. I stepped out of the front door into the cool, clean air of Christmas morning. The world outside was peaceful. A neighbor was walking his dog. Christmas lights blinked cheerfully from across the street. I walked down the familiar stone path, the one Clara and I had laid with our own hands so many years ago. I did not rush. I did not look back. My gaze drifted forward toward the street and settled on the front lawn. There, planted firmly in the green grass, was a sign. Its background was a bold, declarative red, and on it, in stark white letters, was a single word: sold. I kept walking, leaving the house and the life inside it behind me. They had tried to kick me out. Instead, I had chosen to leave, but on my terms, with my dignity intact and my future my own. They were left to face the justice they had earned. I was walking toward a quiet, peaceful life they could never touch. The screen goes dark. This story is a powerful reminder that dignity is not something you outgrow. It is something you defend at any age. True strength is rarely loud. It is found in the quiet patience of a person who observes, gathers facts, and acts with precision. It teaches us that underestimating those who seem frail or silent is a dangerous mistake. Their silence is not emptiness. It is the space where a plan takes root. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about presenting the undeniable truth and calmly walking away from the wreckage you did not create. Share your thoughts on Leo's brand of justice in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones finally have their say.